reached critical mass with seating and the clock. We want to be really mindful because we have 2 more town halls today that we're going to be doing. So let's just get to it. I'm your state senator, Ann Rivers. If you live in the 18th, this will be, after I'm completed today, I think almost 70 town halls that I have completed over the tenure of my elected experience. What we're here for today is to listen to you as we enter into this legislative session, to hear what's on your heart and mind, and ask that you convey that in a respectful way. We're here because we recognize that it's our responsibility to stand in front of the people that we represent, hear what we're doing well, what we need to work on, and those kinds of things. And also for you to understand the spectrum of people whom we represent, and to understand that there are many and varied opinions, and everyone deserves to have their opinion heard. And needs to be treated with respect. A huge shout out to the Port of Washougal. Thank you. Right? Yes, that was bad on me. The Port of Camas Washougal for this fabulous facility, and to our assistants who are here, Michael. This is my assistant, Michael. And the other gentleman will introduce their assistant. Fred Rivers in the back, who is my toughest critic, and if it doesn't pass the Fred Rivers straight face test, it's just not going to get done. So anyway, thank you all so much for being here today. We'll try and get you out of here before okay, elected officials. Elected officials, Mayor Costin from Washougal. We have Larry Keister from the Port of Camas Washougal. We have Ernie from Washougal City Council. We have Paul Greenlee from Washougal City Council.
Steve Hogan's here.
Julie from Washougal City Council. Julie Washougal's in the house. Anybody from Camas here? Steve Hogan. Okay, this is the worst part. Are there any elected officials I missed?
Martha Martin.
Martha Martin from
Fire Commissioner, East County Fire and Rescue.
welcome. Thank you, Martha.
Jim from the school board.
School board from Washougal. Awesome. Okay. Anything else? All right. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to State Representative Renvik.
Hello, and thank you very much for being here. We've commandeered every chair in the building, so sorry to those of you standing, but I think this is a good problem to have. You know, a few years ago, we'd be lucky to have 20 people at a town hall, and I think the current amount of engagement is indicative of a lot of things. Hopefully, we're doing an okay job, but just the fact that there's a lot of issues people want to talk about nowadays, and I think having these venues is a very appropriate and productive way to do that. Just real quick, I'm going into year 8 as your state representative in the 18th district. I haven't done 70 town halls because I'm a few years short, but I've done a number of them, and we're just very happy to be out here. These are always good dialogues, and we're happy to have the conversation. My legislative assistant is Peter Gilmore. He was out front. I think he still is. Our legislative assistants have a big job. They're the funnel for everything that we get. They're the first line of communication. They're the person who's going to answer the phone. They're the person who's going to get the first email. So they do a great job not only taking care of our calendars and the basics, but just helping us facilitate the job. My family, my wife is not here today. We had 4 7-year-old girls spend the night last night, so I think she's making pancakes right now and taking care of all of them. Really excited for this session. In the House, just a little FYI, we are going to see something different. We had the same Speaker of the House for 22 years. That was Frank Chop. He's still in the House, but he stepped down as Speaker, and so we have something new. Lori Jenkins, the new Speaker of the House. She's from Tacoma, and I think the only thing I can really say is we have no idea what's going to happen in 2020. When you have the same Speaker for 22 years, you might not know everything he's thinking, but you know his thought process. we're all going into this new, and I think if you ask some of our Democrat friends, they'd probably say the same thing. We're all trying to figure out what the direction's going to be, what the priorities are going to be. Hopefully we can help form those, and hopefully we can have a productive relationship. Personally, I'm on 3 committees. I serve as the ranking member of the Consumer Protections and Business Committee that does banking, insurance, and business license policy. I serve on the Commerce and Gaming Committee, and we like to joke that the commerce of the state apparently is tobacco, alcohol, marijuana, and gambling, because that's what that committee covers. There is some truth to that, but we do make airplanes and software and some other stuff too. And then the Finance Committee, that's where tax policy gets handled in the House and the Senate. They do spending and tax policy in the same committee. We break it out into 2. So that's where I spend most of my time. Of course, we get to be engaged in every issue that comes before us. But that's real quick about me this year. We can get into priorities and things like that, but we'll pass it to Rep. Hoff for his introduction.
Well, thank you, and good morning for all you fans. We'll try and get you out here before the football games start. And you're lucky enough to get to the first one this morning. So, just by way of introduction, Councilwoman Russell, what's your maiden name, by the way? Oh my gosh. Just checking there. I just wanted to be sure of that.
Yes, we have common answers.
Good to see you. And the mayor of the new mayor of Camas just walked in. Barry McDonald. Barry.
Yeah, a few minutes late, so all right.
Have a seat.
Well, I am your state representative. My colleague Brandon gives me the map that we have to follow every day, and I do that as well as I can. Brandon talked about the fact that we really don't know what's going to happen in the legislature this year. Well, then we're all equal, because I'm still learning as we go. My learning curve is very steep and has been as a freshman, but it's an interesting process, I've got to tell you, one that is challenging every day, and to suggest that it will be an interesting year this year, I think, is an understatement. My assistant is Virginia Hall. You probably saw her as we signed up, but these are the folks that help us answer your questions as well. When you send in an email or a letter or whatever the case might be, or look for an appointment with us, those are the people that you need to get to know, because they handle our schedule. It's a maddening pace up in Olympia. If anything that's surprising to me, it was the pace of things that happen up there. I'm on 3 committees as well. I'm on appropriations. That means every dime that we steal from you folks goes through my committee. We use that committee as kind of a review of all of the policy that goes through that addresses any kind of funding, goes through the appropriations committee. I'm on the Labor and Workplace Standards Committee that deals with union contractor, independent contractor issues. A very interesting committee, and one that will be jam-packed this year as well. And then I serve on Brandon's committee, the Consumer Protection and Business Committee. That's the name.
This year.
This year. Names change depending on who's in charge. Brandon mentioned that we have a new Speaker of the House, and that's Lori Jenkins is a good person. I had the opportunity to sit down and meet with her. We disagree sometimes on philosophy and ideology, but it will be interesting to see how she intends to lead the House of Representatives. I think her intent is to do things as efficiently as possible, and yet there are a lot of issues that will take significant discussion on the floor, so we'll see how that progresses. So, welcome, thank you for giving us your Saturday morning. It's Saturday.
It's still a Saturday.
Still Saturday. And, I guess we're gonna open it up for questions.
Sure.
Catherine Morton, mental health professional, Oregon and Washington, licensed practice for 40 years. The issue I want to keep in front of you, I bring it to you every time, is suicide rate. Adolescents, for the first time, we're seeing the numbers spike with girls, 9 to 14. The other thing that's happening beside that, running out of professionals. you're running out of qualified professionals who can hold the line. And so it's not just private practitioners, it's the agencies. We lost a big agency in Seattle this week. So just keep it in front of you, that's all I'm asking. If it comes forward, you have questions, there's a lot of people like me that would be able to talk to you.
Catherine, couple things. The Volk decision, I think, was devastating for mental health care professionals. We've been working to try and fix that. The Volk decision was a court decision that said that if someone is under medical psychiatric care, then any ideation of harm to anyone or anything must be revealed to that person. And the problem is, of course, that we have to give mental health care professionals the latitude to determine which is said in anger, which is a serious threat, that kind of thing. So we're working on that, and that should help a little bit, but also the work that we've done to start the Mental Health Institute at UW
Yeah.
should be helpful. And lastly, and in my humble opinion, most importantly, is the mental health services for our schools. Because if we can start very young and help to breed, good mental health at the start, and kids understand how to get services and so forth, then I think that that's gonna be critical to aiding in a myriad of problems.
And it doesn't all have to be at the master's level or doctorate level. We do a certain type of work, but at the school systems, you can bring in trained volunteers who can teach how to handle bullying, how to handle self-esteem, how to speak up. So thank you for your time.
Catherine, please leave your information with our assistants as well, so we can contact you. Please leave your contact information with our.
I think the only thing I would add is, legislative sessions tend to have themes. We don't always get to pick them, but for my first 5 or 6 years, it was education funding, right? There was a McCleary court decision, there was a variety of things. I'm not gonna say it's perfectly solved, but we've crossed a bunch of major hurdles as far as that's concerned. Last year, the ball really did start rolling in mental health and housing and how do we take care of what we're just seeing out there, right? I mean, it's hitting us in the face, whether it's someone sleeping on the sidewalk or someone in the family having a crisis, having a suicide, having an addiction. And so I think the theme has started for this mental health / housing movement, what the solutions are or what we're working on right now. But I think as far as the attention being paid, you can't ignore anything, but it's definitely front and center and definitely something that's we're going to address one way, shape, or form. We got to figure out what that is, though.
I'll get you next.
Hello, I'm Don Steinke. Thanks for having these town halls. According to the Trump EPA website, for every $1 we spend reducing air pollution from motor vehicles, we'll save $9 in healthcare costs. I urge you guys to support 2 bills that will reduce air pollution from motor vehicles: the low carbon fuel standard and the California zero emissions vehicles mandate. Those bills will accelerate the transition to electric cars. The low carbon fuel standard has existed in Oregon, California, and British Columbia for about 10 years, and it costs about 1/4 cent a gallon. I urge you to put public health above special interests and support the low carbon fuel standard and the California zero emission vehicles mandate. Are you likely to support those 2 bills? Thank you.
I'll say, I guess I'm not familiar with the California zero emissions mandate, so I'll just start with that. Regarding low carbon fuel standards, I think what I'll say is in its current draft, it's not something that I'm a fan of, but there have been a number of discussions going on during the interim that I think bring all the parties closer together. And I think if that movement continues, I think there's definitely a possibility there. I think what we want to ensure is that transportation does not become cost prohibitive, right? Whether it's trucking, whether it's logging, whether it's just getting to and from work, I think that's a concern. So again, I think there's progress to be made, and I don't want to close the door on that. But if it's the bill from last year, I voted against it last year, I would vote against it again.
I voted against the bill last year. I didn't hear the 1/4 cent a gallon number. In fact, it was somewhere between 28 and 35 cents, if I recall. So it would be an interesting, that's a wide range that I'd have to dig into and understand more thoroughly. last year's bill suggested that everything that was delivered on a truck would have gone up. If you ordered a popsicle, that popsicle would have gone up in price. And it just didn't ring true for me as it was written last year. If indeed there's some movement this year, I'll take a look at it again. But I can't support anything that mimics what happened last year. I appreciate the issue that you're talking about and understand the ramifications, but I don't think that was the answer. What the answer is, I'm not entirely sure, but I don't believe last year's bill was the answer.
For my part, I took a really difficult vote in supporting the gas tax to get projects for my area back in 2015. It was really a hard vote for me. The low carbon fuel according to the governor's numbers, the numbers that his staff used, they used 30 cents a gallon. We were sweating 11.5 cents a gallon to actually build projects. All the gas tax money goes into the 19th Amendment fund, so there's a very clear nexus. It can only be spent on roads and transit. The low carbon fuel standard, as it was presented last year, represents an enormous source of revenue that could be spent on anything. And the chances of us being able to pass a package that could actually then fund our infrastructure, I think would be extraordinarily difficult. And Don, I think about you all the time, and I want to tell you, in a nice way, I think about you because you are absolutely passionate and you are absolutely committed to your position, and you walk your talk, and I love that about you. I'm worried. I have a minimum wage job in the interim. I didn't do it this past summer, but I did it before, and I work with minimum wage earners who thought that breaks were a luxury. And so for them, buying a new electric vehicle is simply out of reach. They couldn't even afford a hybrid if they wanted to. So these are the kinds of things that I'm concerned with. If I can get my concerns addressed and make sure that we're moving forward in a way that isn't financially hurtful, that doesn't gut our ability to replenish or rejuvenate or build new infrastructure, those kinds of things, then I'll have a look at that. But for right now, what we've been presented with seems like it would be fairly devastating for certain segments of our society and also for our infrastructure.
According to Clark PUD staff members who presented this to me, they explained it better than I've been asking for an explanation of this bill for 5 years. And Clark PUD staff members gave the explanation, and they thought it was only a quarter cent a gallon, and so I'm surprised at the difference.
Yeah.
So I'll have to find
That's
out
two.
where that comes from. So thank you very much.
Oh, I think we can talk to Clark PUD as well. It'd be a good resource.
Yeah, where's my assistant? Can you come here, please? So, we need to get the, governor's data to, okay,
Yep.
done.
Thank you.
I'm Todd Stoffel, the Vice President and Interim Executive Director of Timber Unity in Oregon. If you haven't seen what we did, pay attention, it's gonna get better. But with, Washington already has a 49 cent a gallon gas tax. Another 25 is gonna put, things are getting cost prohibitive. I own and operate a truck. I already pay so much in road tax, so much in gas tax, that we keep adding this stuff. Like we heard earlier, it's becoming cost ineffective. How much is enough? We've got so many other things we can do to help with air. Get this other bridge bill. I'm a fan of a third bridge. Get traffic moving. When you're sitting in traffic, that's what causes the pollution. You gotta get the traffic moving. We can thin our forests. Skamania County is 90% timberlands. 90%. And those trees are choking each other. So they're not doing their job. You got, you know, your little trees to your 30-year-old, 40-year-old trees are the ones that clean the air. Anything bigger than that, you know, kinda like us, doesn't do its job. So the forests need to be thin, we need to keep a rotation of crops going, of trees, cause that's what they are, is a crop. And in turn, it provides jobs at mills and on down the line. It's, you know, and then the cap and trade. That, I hope, I wanna talk more with you guys on that, and I hope it is entirely different than what they're trying to pass to the south of us. If not, we're in trouble, because that's gonna raise the cost of everything. You know, fuel, that 25 cents you were talking about, if the cap and trade goes in Oregon, it was another 28 cents a gallon. So, everything is getting so cost prohibitive, when is enough enough? And, you know, when do we start managing things correctly? You know, the money that's gonna be raised from the cap and trade and the different taxes, is there legislative oversight on how it's spent? Or is it just a governor, you know, slush fund that we can put wherever we want? You know, that's what the people are saying that are paying the taxes, that are, you know, being taxed to death, is enough is enough.
You know, I want to add on to that, and I think it's especially true in this area of my district, and I will say also in Ridgefield. I have found people don't mind paying taxes if they see value and benefit for what they're paying. The problem is right now, there's a lot of concern that they're not really seeing any benefit. There's a lot of concern about that, and I think that that's part of our job, is to help to rebuild that trust and that faith.
I think I just point out too, it's kind of part of the job we have here is recognizing the ecosystem, not just as the word describes it, but as any decision is made, right? There are multiple ways to attack a problem, and there's also multiple consequences from any one bill. So I think your points are well taken and well heard, and obviously happy to talk more about the cap and trade and whatever you want to talk about in the future. But I think that's the point, right? I mean, there are multiple ways to tackle any environmental solution. There's multiple ways to tackle transportation. There's multiple ways to tackle a lot of things. How do we bring those ideas together and make a bipartisan solution that can pass?
Yeah, and for me, owning my business and my truck, I've found, you know, there's been several problems that I've just kept throwing money at, and the problems never changed. And so that's where, when do we try something different? Because what we've been doing, you know, I'm more familiar with Oregon stuff,
Sure.
but what we've been doing for 40 years hasn't worked. We've gotta try something different. Thanks.
Thank you for your patience.
Yes, my name is Pat Edmondson. I'm a mental health counselor in private practice in Camas. And my concern is I'm moving to make some changes in RCW 2644 to where verbal and emotional abuse are considered more. Last February, Ann, you were very gracious in stepping out of I think it was a caucus meeting, and spoke with me. And I just want you guys to know that I'm not giving up. I'm moving forward with this, and we'll go through the Human Services and Early Education Committee.
Nice. Thank you for your work on that. The lady in the purple,
Oh,
I think.
actually, I wanted to kind of piggyback on his comments from a different perspective. I mean, it's in the courts now that what's his name? Anyway, the car tabs, $30 car tabs.
Oh, the I-9.
So we're gonna lose some funding there. We're also losing funding because more people are buying hybrids and electric cars and things like that. So instead of piling everything into the gas, which is a diminishing return, why don't we instead say, you know, we're gonna have some kind of special tax. Everybody would know what they're paying taxes for. It would keep our roads up. It would help us to, you know, have more new infrastructure because we're a growing area. People love this area and they're coming in. And you're right that if people know what they're paying taxes for, they go, okay, I'm all right with that. And they can vote on it as it comes back up if there's, you know, a sundown provision or a grandfather provision or whatever. But I mean, these are things where, as adults, we need to talk about this stuff and say, it is important that, you know, maybe his job will suffer, but maybe kids won't have asthma, so where do we balance that? How do we get him help for his job, but keep the kids healthy? Because I know asthma was not, in my generation, that was not as big a concern as it is now. It's horrendous to see. So, you know, we've got to address this stuff as the grown-ups, you know.
Well, I think the point there too, I think we recognize that the gas tax revenue will keep going down and the need for roads and maintenance won't. I think the big concern that I have especially is that if we find a replacement source of revenue, that's okay. We don't need to compound additional revenues while keeping the ones that we still, you know, have, right? We don't need to double down, I guess, so to speak. So I think those solutions are what we have to look for. I mean, if we don't, that pot's gonna run dry sooner rather than later as far as road construction and maintenance is concerned. So I think absolutely that is what the adults have to do, is figure it out. Let's just make sure we're taking in what we need and not taking it to be punitive, I guess is the point I'm trying to get at.
There is a point where no matter what the new tax is, it will be too much. There's a point where we just can't afford any more taxes. I think you know, and this is kind of a general statement, but generally, I think it would behoove us to take a look and see if we can't save $1 or $2 on something. Your issue about roads is absolutely spot on. As we stop picking up gas taxes, the roads then that will have been supported by those, that they will continue to deteriorate. So we need to understand that a little bit more. Where we get those funds is kind of the other side of the discussion. Can we save some money somewhere in this vast machine we call state government to truly support some of those things? It's an issue that we talk about periodically, but it seems that our government continues to grow and we don't really achieve much. So, your point is well taken.
Well, you know, the population's growing as well, so you have to address the issues that brings with it. And, you know, I mean, not to be rude, but you guys ran that you could do this, and we're looking to you, not just to listen, but then to take it back and talk with people with whom you may not disagree, may not agree, you know, and really work it out, hammer it out, and go, if we give you this, what do we get back? So that the roads are kept up, because believe me, I grew up in a rural area of Wisconsin. We had dirt roads for the most part, and I don't want to go back. Nobody wants to go back to that. So, you know, that's not an answer as far as how we address the population coming into our beautiful area.
Well, I think one of the things that they're talking about is the VMT, or vehicle miles travel charge. So the gas tax would go away, but you would pay for the miles that you use. That way, everyone who uses the road pays for it. If you don't use, then you don't pay. But there are so many things to be worked out with that. Like, for example, all of the bonds that we have for our roads, our projects, new construction and maintenance, upkeep, those kinds of things, are all predicated on the gas tax. So I don't understand bond law per se, but I do think that that represents a significant hurdle. And then there's, then it doesn't matter if you buy your gas at a tribal station, if you plug in at your home and do electric, or if you're, you know, it doesn't matter, everyone is paying for the road like a utility. That's one thing that they're looking at, but it's still, there are so many snags to be worked out. I participated in the pilot, so what I did was I took a picture of my odometer reading at the beginning of the month and then at the end of the month, and got an invoice for what I'd be paying. So I feel I'm not worried about Big Brother, because they never knew where I was going, they only knew how many miles I had on my car. So I'm not advocating it, I just wanna let you know that that's something that's out there right now, and it's got lots of bugs that they're trying to work through to see if it could even be implemented, so.
Yeah.
My brother from Michigan.
Thank you. At the outset, we very much appreciate this, this meeting and also the civility that's shown here. Other events were not as civil. My question goes back to the cap and trade, and neither for or against, I'm just curious. Has there been a cost benefit that has been done? Because I asked the same question, Oregon. We're 47th in carbon production. I expect with the hydro-based electric system, it's not far off. So we have low carbon output. And so I'm curious about what is the cost, what is the benefit? Second, how much revenue is expected to be derived from cap and trade, cap and dividend, carbon tax, whatever? And thirdly, who benefits? Is it gonna go for more infrastructure? Is it gonna be rebated back to the members based on the amount of energy that they could conserve? At least in Oregon, when I asked my representative, those were never answered. I'm curious if you've done a similar cost analysis.
Well, here in Washington, you're not gonna get an answer from me. Those are pretty thick questions. I need to research those. I appreciate the questions. The cap and trade bill that was proposed last year had a companion bill that went with it that had a little bit more of a carrot kind of approach as opposed to a stick. And there was discussions around revenue and the actual cost of that. So I can't answer your questions directly, but I know we're recording those, so I'll get back to you on that. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think part of the problem too is there's not, we didn't get to the point that Oregon got to, as far as this is the bill that's going to the floor for a vote. We have a lot of proposals that are floating around out there, plus on the ballot 2 years ago or last year, whenever it was, there was the carbon tax initiative in general. So there's a lot of different proposals running around out there. They vary greatly. I mean, it was mentioned earlier, the one that was on the ballot literally gave the tax money to the governor to spend. That was scary. And then there's other proposals that are more diligent about it, but it is definitely a hodgepodge of ideas right now. There was a second part to your question.
How much would be raised? I know there's various proposals.
Right,
I'm
yes,
just curious.
yes, from some billion to many billion is definitely the answer to those questions. I mean, it's a big topic, and I think it fell apart not because of Republican-Democrat divide. I mean, there's that to some extent, but I mean, the proposals were so varied that coming together on something was just not happening. So it's going to come back up. I mean, we know who the players are, but I think to answer the question simply and directly is just not possible.
Is the legislature mindful of the failed ballot measures?
Some of us are.
You would hope. I mean, look, it's the people pushing the proposals. The ballot measure passed in their district, right? So I mean, you know, everyone's representing their own constituents. Again, we haven't taken that final vote, so I guess you don't know
That is a very good answer.
what you don't know, but yeah.
Lily?
Thank you. I think we'll do a little twist of change. But curious, so the health department released that they're gonna do HPV as part of required mandate for school immunization. Have you heard, is there a bill being drafted coming up, and any thoughts and what your stances could be on that?
I'll tell you, I've not heard, no, not that I'm aware of yet, but we've all been spread to the four winds. We'll reconvene, January 13th, and then we'll get a better preview. My younger sister is a nurse with 3 children, and, after doing the research, she said it's just too dicey. She said she's taking other means or other approaches to keep them safe. And so she said it's just too dicey right now, so she recommends.
I'm a registered nurse, and I would fully and strongly recommend protecting your children from certain.
Me too, I agree.
Whether you want to mandate something like that, I am not clear on that, why going back to cost, you'll see there come a lot to cost, and there are costs and benefits to things. However, the evidence around climate change, around vaccinations is incredibly strong from a community and a public health standpoint. There are some things that individuals can choose to do, absolutely, I don't want my rights taken away. However, from a public and a community health standpoint, if we are paying a large amount of our taxes or a large amount of our insurance costs towards treatments that were completely preventable, that seems to be a disservice to the community at large. And sometimes somebody has to give a little bit for the good of the community.
I just am not sure that school districts need to be engaging in sexual health and as a precursor to get, for a kindergartner to get into school, they need HPV. I
think we
don't,
need to look a little bit more at the evidence, it's not kindergarten. And it doesn't.
for the mandate for entry into school.
No.
Can I speak? There's some statistics that I think folks should know, and I encourage you to do the research. The death rate of cervical cancer in the US is 2.3 out of 100,000. The death rate in the Gardasil clinical trials was 85 out of 100,000. The total HPV associated cancer rate of cervical, anal, vaginal, and vulvar cancer is 19.8 out of 100,000. According to Gardasil, there is a 2.3% chance you will develop an autoimmune disease after receiving the HPV vaccine. If you're not all aware, in 1986, legislation was passed to protect pharmaceutical companies from being sued. They are liability free. I don't know any other industry in this country that is liability free. They are allowed to pass and put on the market any vaccine that they want without a double-blind placebo study. And the placebos that they use are only free of the disease that they are trying to push on the market. They are not free of the adjuvants or emulsifiers that go into the vaccines. Please do some research on what goes into the vaccines and about what other studies have said about what vaccines do. It's not just about the disease. It's about all of the other things that happen to your body when you inject them. Please continue to support my right to keep my children in school. I cannot afford to pay $45,000 to $60,000 to hire someone to homeschool my child. Thank you.
All right, one sec, is this on that same issue, or?
No.
Okay, I'm gonna come back to you in 1 minute. John Lee? No, did you not, or, what?
Different issue.
I'm fine with that. Is everyone fine with that? Is there?
So I want to welcome my representatives to Camas, home of 90% of the citizens saying we're not paying outrageous taxes for things that don't work. And that message was heard throughout the entire state. As Representative Vick talked about, the last 3 sessions of the state legislature focused on fixing education funding via the McCleary decision. The citizens of our state were promised a local property tax cut as part of that solution. And now that local property tax cut appears to have vanished. As one of the creators of the McCleary fix, I would welcome your input on when are we going to get our property tax relief locally.
So you received cuts on both your winter and fall taxes this year. What happened was, when we struck that bargain, the Republicans were in the majority coalition caucus. And we were needed in order to get a budget. So we held out for a property tax cut for our people. When the Democrats took control of the Senate, they then had 3 houses. They had the House of Representatives, they had the Senate, and of course, they had the governor's mansion. So when they did that, they erased not only the agreement on the tax cuts, they erased about 90% of the entire McCleary bill, which is why in the next 3 years, we will be back into a McCleary-like situation because they didn't want to do the things that we needed to do to make sure that we could have a sustainably funded education system. For example, we put in $11 billion more into the education system with the caveat that there could be no that contracts that were not up could not be opened and negotiated. Therefore, all the programmatic money would go into the program. And I'm thinking specifically career and technical education and special education were the two that I bird dogged. The follow-on to 2242 erased all of that, and so all the contracts immediately came open, and I was quoted in the newspaper as saying it was like dragging a donut through a fat farm. Everyone saw the money and jumped in and wanted their piece, and so we saw these amazing spikes across the state in teacher pay. Not that teachers are not worth it. I was a teacher. I know how hard it is, but the original approach of 2242 had a ramp up that would have made sense, but they wanted it all. And I'm not talking about the teachers, I'm talking about the union. They wanted it all, they wanted it now, and they took it. So we are almost all, I think there's only one or two provisions left. One is the 4-year balanced budget outlook for school districts. But even OSPI, Chris Reichdahl is saying, yeah, he doesn't really care about it, so report if you're in balance or not. He doesn't care. So that's what happened. We did the very best we could to solve a really crummy situation, and politics being, elections have consequences, John, you know that. So we did the very best we could. We drove reforms that would have been good had they been able to be carried through, but they weren't. And so that's the situation that we are currently in. I'm most sensitive to Camas because the most seniors lost their homes in Camas, in my district. It was the seniors who lost their homes because they can no longer afford to pay the taxes. So it's not surprising to me that the pool went down, because it's not really, education is a priority. We need to educate our kids. A pool, not so much.
I will say I think there's room for hope on this one too, because we keep talking about affordable housing, and as I mentioned earlier, this next session's probably mental health and affordable housing, or housing in general. And I think there is a real realization that property taxes are becoming more and more of a hindrance to home ownership, even to renting. As Ann mentioned, seniors, especially those living off of Social Security, are getting dinged the hardest and suffering the most consequences. And while our property taxes are very high in Clark County, you can't imagine what they're paying in Seattle. This is a bipartisan issue, I tell you what. When your property tax bill is $12,000 in Seattle, you're starting to ask what's going on. And so I think it's an issue that, I don't want to look at you and say we're going to, come together, kumbaya, lower your property taxes by half next year. But I do think it's something that is more on the radar than it ever has been. McCleary was not perfect, but I think we were all very happy with a nice negotiated package. And again, a year later, when that negotiation, gets gone back on, that's a tough thing to swallow. But we get to look for the next option and the next opportunity, and I think that's what we're doing. There are discussions though, and I don't want to, some things are Republican versus Democrat, some things aren't. I don't think this is one that you can draw a clear party line. You can pick people from a party, but I don't think you can draw a unanimous conclusion there. So it is impactful, and it's something that when you have the amount of people losing their homes that they are, there's the old adage that one is too many, but really, we're talking about almost a crisis. Almost a crisis.
What are the numbers? How many people have lost their homes in the state of Washington because they have not been able to pay their property taxes? I think that's a bunch of crap, quite honestly. I'm sorry, I'll try to be more respectful, but I don't believe you.
In I don't mind, maybe our new mayor knows, in Camas,
Good.
I can tell
me,
you,
sir. You don't know. So far, sir, you've told me you need a compass, because you don't know what direction we're going. You've told me you're stealing taxes. I don't like thieves. I don't like liars. Ma'am, you folks are, I admire you for coming out here and speaking your piece, but all the questions that are being posed have been posed for years. Can we build a bridge? What about you, sir, in your business? You pass the cost on to the person purchasing the lumber. It's gonna cost more, so you gotta do that. Don't complain about what you're paying. If we don't pay our taxes, ladies and gentlemen, we will end up in one of those places that the president describes as a shithole. I don't wanna live in that shithole. I have children, I have grandchildren, and our environment should be number one. And I don't know why, constituents, why the hell don't you wanna pay taxes? Why don't you wanna build civic centers
Settle down.
for your children?
Settle down.
You know what? I'll gladly settle down.
Okay, then we'll just have a conversation here that has.
So
a
far,
little
here,
bit
I'm
more-
hearing rehash.
Well,
And you're not doing anything. You haven't done anything.
we haven't done anything.
No, you have not, sir.
We're
You know, we're talking about issues of our children. You know, back in the 15 and 1600s, a fellow by the name of William Shakespeare told us about this in a tragic play. A 12 and 13-year-old child killed themselves for forbidden love. We used to have mental health care. Somebody eliminated it. Can anybody research and tell me who? That happened back when Ronald Reagan was the president. ACLU. So what the hell are we gonna do about it? Our kids suicide is killing more people on the road than alcohol. What are you going to do? You know, I'm out of control, so I'm gonna leave. Ladies and gentlemen, would somebody please pick this up? You're welcome, sir. I'll talk to anybody personally that wants to talk to me.
So let me address that just for a second. This gentleman has a great opinion. I mean, everybody's opinion is valid. How we express that opinion is different. That's one of the problems I think we have today.
Agreed.
I appreciate his opinion. I don't have a problem with that at all. How we address that opinion is different for me. It's just a principle I have to stand on. Whether or not we agree with that principle, we can talk about that as well.
Hi, thank you for holding these town meetings. I've been to several over the years, and I appreciate the ability to be able to speak directly to you. This goes to Larry. You were kind enough to, you had sent out like a newsletter of different things you're working on, and then you had a option for citizens to receive a link to, it's SB 5243 regarding the, I think what it is qualifying who can stand before the Growth Management Hearings Board.
Yes, ma'am.
And you wanted to put an addendum to that?
Well, I'm proposing legislation that will make it, that will give the people that have truly an issue with a particular growth management issue the ability to bring an issue before the Growth Management Board. Somebody that has standing, essentially. Standing means, do they have a financial impact to that particular decision, or will a decision impact them that other than the fact that they live near the area? So it has a little bit more of an ownership issue with that GMA.
But does that also prohibit other people from being able to stand before the hearings board?
It will.
Does it limit who can and who can't?
If indeed you are financially impacted or have a particular impact, whether it's financial or some other definition in the, I think I have the bill here, I could share it with you.
I have it on my phone as
Oh,
well.
there you go. You have to have some responsibility in that particular decision in order to be in front of the hearings board to talk about that.
Okay, because one of my concerns is I looked at who was pro for that, and the pro side was someone from the Building Industry Association in Washington.
Sure.
And then the person who was on the con side was from an organization called FutureWise.
Sure.
And they, let's see, I said that, it says that FutureWise has supported implementation of GMA, but the focus of FutureWise is to prevent conversion of wildlife habitat, open space, farmland, and working forests to subdivisions and development. And they also focus on livability, so to me, that's kind of a red flag that, by limiting who can speak before the board, I mean, I think everybody who lives here is impacted somehow in the Growth Management Act, whether you live on property that's going to be converted to something. If you care about Southwest Washington, like I know everybody in this room does, that's why they're here, I'm really not seeing a need for something like this, personally. Because there was a really great showing in, thank you, sir, really great showing up in Battleground last month for the, just understanding how the GMA works. And I know there's another one coming to Camas on the 30th of January, and I know a lot of people are gonna go to that as well. And living in Camas, I know Barry McDonald is right on board with this, who was amazingly elected as a write-in. I mean, that tells you that people really are concerned, and their voice needs to be heard in all different ways. Like that gentleman that was very passionate, maybe he didn't come across as respectfully as he could have, but I think there's such this groundswell of concern for so many different things, whether it's national or local, you know, but we can't affect change everywhere, so in my mind, I'm trying to affect change in my little world, which is Camas, and I feel passionately about how I have seen over the last 20 years that I've lived in Camas, the natural environment just clear-cutted and people packed into each other, and I know that I don't like that, and I feel like that gentleman that left, if I'm not heard, or people aren't heard and it keeps continuing, that just gets people so infuriated. So I really, I mean, respectfully, Larry, if you,
you're
just,
doing real well.
I'm really very sweaty right now and don't really like to speak in front of people,
doing
but
real well.
I'm trying really hard to make a valid point in a respectful manner, but I just feel like if you limit the people who can speak in front of the board, that just says, it does not a good message, I don't think, to people.
I appreciate your thoughts, ma'am, and essentially, for me, that won't accelerate any development or stop any development. In my eyes, it just gives somebody that stands in front of that board that has more responsibility for that particular decision. You mentioned FutureWise, they're a good group, they do very good things. Just sometimes they have a desire to stop everything that an industry would otherwise continue on. We need a building industry in this town, there's no question about that. Whether or not you agree with that particular clear cut or that development, I appreciate that thought, because I have some of those same issues. Now, that being said, if we have one particular agency that does nothing but put up roadblocks continually for whatever development that is proposed, that's a troubling thing for me as well.
Well, do they always put up roadblocks, or are they making
Just
valid
about,
points?
just about all the time. And that's not to suggest that your point isn't valid, I appreciate that. I just happen to think that there's a better balance out there somewhere. Whether or not we see that piece of legislation be successful or not depends a little bit on the elections have consequences thing, so let's stay in touch with that. I wouldn't mind talking to you more about that.
Definitely, and also just one more thing about the GMA, is that I read recently that there is no measurement tool really to know if it's doing what it was meant to do initially. Is that something maybe
That's
that can
correct.
come up, that just to make sure that its intent is actually showing, you know, success?
So we've hit the 25-year anniversary of the GMA, and that's the big question the legislature has asked. There's a study that I think's been completed by now out of UW, and that's what we're trying to get our hands around is what was it not set up to do, but what does it mean in 25 years later, right? Do we need the same things? Do we have the same goals? And so I think those measurements are something that we're moving towards. And also, can it be improved? And what does improvement mean? Maybe it's tighter, maybe it's looser, but it is definitely in the process of going on, finding out what those metrics would be.
Yeah, because I feel like communities should be able to form their communities the way their own vision, not say that the state tells them how.
Well, actually, that's spot on. Yeah. Right now, we can't do that necessarily. I mean, we have some flexibility, but not as dramatically as we should have.
The Ruckelshaus Center study that was just completed, I just was on the phone last week with the gentleman who headed up the project, and he shared with me that there'll be several small bills that sort of nibble at the edges, but that they need to go back and look at what would really, make sure that it was achieving the outcomes that the legislators who passed it thought that it was gonna achieve. So there's just, you can always count, and this guy was right. He's like, oh, it's the same thing over and over. So since I've been in the legislature, GMA is always very near the top for lots of reasons. But yeah, we'll see some activity, but the whole idea of if it's not measured, it's not managed, kind of.
Yeah, cause telling Camas we have to be, 35,000 people by a certain date, why? Why do we have to be 35,000 people?
Is
Then we
growth
can't-
always
Then the
good?
schools are overcrowded, the roads are overcrowded, and it's a hamster wheel. So to me, it doesn't really, it's like an oxymoron. It's not really managing growth, it's dictating growth, but not being able to handle it.
So I think your last couple of comments is the reason that we have concern. It's not regulation for growth. This might be my opinion, I think it's true, but I believe that the GMA was designed to force urbanization.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And you might think that's good, you might think that's bad, but that's why there is a target of 35,000 people for Camas. Camas, in my opinion, should be able to regulate whatever the heck they want. Maybe you don't want another house in Camas and you convince your mayor that that's the way to go. That's Camas's decision, right? And maybe Battleground wants to build another 20,000 of them. I think that's how the system should work. I think there should be controls. We should protect certain, natural resources. We should protect certain parklands and open spaces, absolutely. But is that cubicles in Olympia, or is that the people in this room? And I think that's where the big hurdle has been. That is honestly where the FutureWise group starts coming into the conversation. That is where some of these other groups start piling in. I had a bill about the GMA that did one simple thing. It would allow you, if you live in rural Clark County, to put one of those, mother-in-law tiny homes in your backyard. That was a no from FutureWise. I mean, it's any type of growth outside of that urban core has been a problem there. But what's responsible is the real question. So I think your point is well taken. I think we're actually moving in the same direction here, and I hope we're communicating that. And I just wanted to address real quick, you mentioned it, and of course this gentleman mentioned it. We realize that if everybody was tickled pink, this room would be empty today, right? I mean, you'd be doing something else. So we totally get that. And the thing that actually causes me the most pain, even when I can give an answer once in a while, is I know that wasn't the final word that they wanted to hear. But there's 147 of us in Olympia. We've got to come to a consensus. We don't spend every day there. I mean, we've been up and down, but we really haven't been legislating since the middle of April. So things, they start and they stop, and there's collaboration involved. I could tell you my absolute opinion on every bill, but I can't tell you exactly how we're going to get more counselors, and I can't tell you exactly how we're going to get more potholes filled until we've made that decision. I hope that makes sense. It might sound like skirting the question, I get that, but this is a collaborative process. We try not to be Washington, D.C. I don't like going in front of the camera. I mean, it just is what it is, and hopefully we're doing the job you sent us there to do.
Follow up to that?
I just want to add that picking up on the word balance, yes, okay, but when you're looking at individual municipalities, Clark County is one county is consistent of a number of small cities, fire districts, ER districts. The Troutdale watershed is what I want you to look at. It's huge, it's enormous. It drains the entire geographic area. So if you throw, I've got friends in Battleground who have to drop a deeper well now because of the building change in the water. So you gotta keep looking at the balance of the entire geographical area, not just the individual communities. But I am all pro for individual management of the community within the district. But don't lose track of the aquifer.
Got it. There was someone right in front of you. Okay. Perfect. You go.
My name is David Palo. I'm a resident of Washougal. And I heard recently that some of you are supporting a third bridge, specifically near the port. Is that correct? No?
I mean, it's an option. I haven't said a specific bridge in a specific place, but it's under consideration.
Oh, okay. I wanted to know if there's any leadership, anybody leading an effort to have a bridge closer to our district here near Camas.
So, So Brandon is the co-chair. Did you see the bus that just ran here?
Sometimes your name gets pulled out of a hat.
But I do wanna say this, our positions on a third bridge have been characterized in many, many ways. I will say, I don't think there's anyone on the committee who doesn't want a third, fourth, fifth, sixth bridge. I mean, if you look how many Portland has, it seems like we should have just as many going between our states. And in fact, you know, other states. But, the first priority right now is the I-5 bridge because it is so much of the way there. We have a lot of the work from the last time that the project was halted, that we can use. It's still usable. We have a substantial bill from the federal government that we'll have to pay back if we don't complete our work there. We have two structures that are pretty old. So there's no project at all anywhere right now because we're still looking at what is going to be the best project. In my perfect world, it's a tunnel. Cause then we can hang on to the existing bridge and we can go underneath. We can increase capacity and reduce congestion and all those good things. But I don't think there's anyone here who doesn't want a multitude of crossings. And one of the things that we did was talk about the development of a bridge authority who does nothing but looks for locations. The proposed project, when I talked with my colleagues in Oregon about the 192nd proposition, they were saying not only no, but heck no, but they didn't say heck. So I think that part of it was.
Why did they say no?
Because they are freaked out about 82 is a parking lot in the morning, so they're like, you're gonna dump more people into our parking lot?
See, I would think, and I'm not specifically talking about 192nd, I think something more closer to Camas would be better, because the land's there, the crossing is set there. But it would seem to me, with Amazon across the river right there, there's a FedEx facility, there's an airport, it would seem to me that it would help with the traffic to take some of the traffic off on 84.
Well, it should be spread out, but you've got people heading into the city on 80, I mean, they have their people going that way, so we'll see.
What I will say is that there are definitely a number of people, so there's an official bi-state group, right? There's 8 legislators from Washington, 8 from Oregon. We're sitting down and we're having these public meetings. What we've done to date is kind of go over the history. Where were we? What happened with the CRC? What documents are available? Why were things thrown out of the mix? Just what happened, right? We're learning from our past to figure out what our future is. Within that group, there are definitely people who are advocating for additional crossings. I don't think anybody has mentioned a specific, hill to die on crossing besides something that makes the system work better. I will also say something that was interesting to me is I think many of us expected Oregon to come to the table and say I-5 or nothing. And actually at our first meeting, we produced this list of principles that included replacement of the I-5 bridge. And the Oregon delegation changed it to say the I-5 or an additional bridge. And so I think there's a lot of discussion going on that happens for a number of reasons. And again, you don't have to have the same you don't have to see the same problem to want the same goal. For example, there's a senator from the Rose Garden, Lou Fredrickson. That man hates smog and congestion more than anything in the world because his district is impacted by it, asthma and health-related concerns especially. So I think if it's just we're putting up a new I-5 bridge that does nothing to affect congestion, I can guarantee you he's going to give a loud no speech on that and probably influence a vast majority of his colleagues. So I mean, in that world, those discussions are happening. The group is not to a point where we're even talking about how many pilings there are and how much art there is and where it's going to go. We're learning from our past. But I think to my surprise, that discussion is more open than I thought it would be between the decision makers.
In fact, I want to add in, it's not just about the bridge or the bridge design or any of that. all of the sacred cows, or many of the sacred cows that were, you know, the hills to die on the last project, I mean, the reality is, we offered a plan whereby there would be, that we could move forward last time, and both Governor Kitauber and Jay Inslee said no light rail, no bridge, right? So, so we're not hearing that this time. We're not hearing no light rail. They're saying you're gonna have a mass transit component. We say, yeah, and they go, huh, all right, let's keep talking. So it's a very different time now than it was back then. Ernie?
Yeah, well, with the last bridge, I did some research, and what bothered me was all the pork that came with the monies for the last bridge. I mean, they were gonna build a bus depot in Hillsborough, but I researched a bridge that was being built over the Mississippi River. 3 interstates, longer crossing, it was $700 million for just, you know, and ours was, what, $2.7 billion, you know? And I'll give you another quick example. The bridge that goes across Highway 14 to the apple tree, okay? A little pedestrian, okay? It was like, was it 1.7, $2.7 million to build that. And the one going on the transit right past the freeway, going over to Max, I had called and asked them, what did it cost to build that bridge? And they told me it was $300,000. Okay, so my concern with the building of the bridge is the pork, and building it in a way that it costs, instead of, I mean, I know it has to look nice, and that's fine, but to spend that much money to build the bridge that is just gonna move vehicles across, it shouldn't have to cost that much. So I don't know how you reduce the pork, or why they want the pork, but I think that's prohibitive from us doing what we should be doing.
Part of the problem with the old project was that they had $1 figure for bridge, but it actually included 2 or 3 subsidiary bridges. Many people don't think about the bridge in terms of, or the transit center on Hayden Island is truly on an island. So you have to cross sloughs and rivers to get to the transit facility. So the costs of those bridges and all the NEPA and SEPA, all of that stuff was included in, they just called it bridge cost instead of bridges cost. So that was a significant thing, but in my pea brain, which, you know, maybe too idealistic, I see where we pay for half the bridge and any improvement on our side of the river, and Oregon pays for half the bridge and and whatever federal dollars that we can get just lowers the amount that we, you know what I mean, if we get any federal dollars at all. So, I mean, I agree with you. Part of my frustration with that project is, just sort of the shell game of where's this money going? Why am I having to work so hard to understand where this money's going? You're right, retrofitting the Burnside Bridge for light rail, how is that our problem? The bus barn, the new TriMet administrative offices at the far end of Highway 99, why are we paying for that? That doesn't, so, I agree with you.
Julie does.
Julie?
Yes, Julie Russell. So I have a couple of issues. So I recently just closed my office in Tigard because I'm tired of that drive. It was only 38 miles from my house to my office. It could take 40 minutes or it could take 2 hours. But it's not just the bridge that needs to be fixed, it's the bottlenecks on the Oregon side too. When it goes down to one lane from 84 to 205, that is always gonna be a problem. And I hope that's being addressed. And I would hope that all the public officials that are making that decision drive that during rush hour and see what it's really like too. And then the other issue too is what Kathy Morton said. You know, I'm a mental health professional. There is a huge spike in suicide rates. I'm a private practitioner, and I spend about 40% of my time or more just doing paperwork and dealing with insurance companies. So if that process could be, you know, made more efficient. I recently got a payment from a year ago that I served a client. So insurance companies are a pain in the butt to deal with, and they make it so difficult for mental health providers. And so being aware of that, I think that causes a lot of people not to want to do this industry because it's hard work. And thank you for your hard work. and happy to listen to these various opinions and people who are angry too.
The one thing I will say is this is the coolest job in some respects, because every question is a new learning experience in Olympia. Every 15 minutes you're like, wow, I knew nothing about that, now I know enough to be dangerous. But I do really appreciate it, and that's, we need to do our homework on a lot of things, we know a lot of things, and just, if you appreciate that with us, I think it's greatly helpful.
I'm gonna go to the lady in the yellow, and then I'll go to you, Molly.
Hi, I'm Annette Garner. I'm an advanced practice nurse with experience with high-risk pregnancy and sick newborns. And I have an easy win for you. Senator Kaiser's bill to cap insulin at $100 a month would make a huge difference for families. And then the dangerous part for you all is chlorpyrifos. It is a pesticide that was initially developed by the Nazis in World War II as a nerve agent. It's currently used on strawberries and apples and other vegetables, and it's been shown to cause neurologic damage in young children. It was off the EPA list as an approved pesticide. Sorry.
No, you're doing fine.
It has now come back on the list. If you can't afford organic fruits and vegetables for your young children, then those children are exposed to neurologic damage. The research is early on this, but it is conclusive. And I would like you to do whatever you can to get that off of our fruits and vegetables in Washington.
Thank you. Let's make sure that we get some of that information to dig
happy
into,
to share.
please.
Thank you. Molly?
I just want to thank you guys for coming down here today. I mean, it's wonderful to see so many people that want to be engaged and bring intelligent conversation with their own passion. We all know that we have many issues that concern us all, and working our way through them is not easy, always. I have so much respect for all of you. You've always done a great job for us in Washougal and tried to meet the needs that we've got. We know it's not easy, but I just want to say thanks to you all for spending some time on a beautiful Saturday morning to engage with us. So thanks.
You're more than welcome.
My name's Caleb Donor. I'm a resident here of Washougal, and I guess my big concern for this legislative season is attacks on the Second Amendment, mostly by the left, to remove our right to keep and bear arms as United States citizens, and I just really want to encourage you to resist those attacks, and I'd like to know what you guys plan to do to ensure that our constitutional rights are maintained.
Well, there's a few bills that are approaching or nibbling at the Second Amendment, and again, depending on how you read the Second Amendment, it would suggest that's where your vote and your passions would lie. Personally, I think it does nothing to affect the true solution to some of the violence issues. I think what we're talking about is essentially making it harder for the folks that, the overused term is law-abiding citizens. So I will struggle as those come to the floor.
I'm going to be introducing legislation that says that anyone who uses a gun an illegally obtained gun to commit a crime will get an immediate life sentence.
Perfect.
I'm sorry about your luck. If you want to threaten everyone else's rights,
How are you gonna pay for that?
it's cheap. Prison's cheap. Compared to the loss of life, you betcha.
You know, and I'll add on too, I think that finding the avenues by which to appropriately punish those folks who have committed the crime is I think an area that I'm interested in finding progress in. I'm interested to learn more about your bill. But I think, you know, as it comes to Washington State, it's pretty tough to find a bill that we haven't passed around guns. There is, of course, the governor's new ideas with magazines and semi-automatic weapons, but I think, I mean, this is a state where, I'm not gonna call it thought policing, but I mean, we have these red flag laws. We have a system that actually works really well when it comes to background checks. You know, I've had the privilege to walk into a few gun stores. I'm not a gun guy per se. I don't own an AR-15 or anything like that, but you know, you ask them, you say, you know, who buys guns here? Well, people who can. We have a lot of people come in that try and buy guns that aren't allowed to, and you know the first thing we do? We send it to the police. I said, our business is on the line, our license is on the line, and oh, by the way, we have a moral compass. You know, we don't want to sell guns to bad guys. And so I think, you know, for as much as we can know somebody's behavior and intention, for as much as we can prove that someone's going to cause harm, we can keep the guns out of their hands through legal means. They're still going to get a gun. They're still going to get one. But are they getting it because of the state? And the answer to me is no. So I think what you said makes sense there. Another interesting thing, this is not necessarily a party line issue. You can simplify it to that. But there are a lot of people in rural Washington especially, if you want to find Democrat legislators, who struggle with this discussion as well. Because it's a way of life. It's a way of life. And, you know, I mean, in each party you're going to have people that, you know, jump on the PR bandwagon and follow that agenda, you know, off the edge of the planet. And you're going to find people who realize what's going on in their district. And I think there's a reason that these bills usually hit roadblocks. And it's because the discussions happen. 2020 is another year. It's an election year. A lot of things are up in the air. But I think, you know, to say that Washington is under-regulated would be a misstatement. How about that?
And I'd like to point out that last year we passed so many pieces of legislation that let people out of jail early. And some of them profoundly. Adam Betancourt, who killed the seniors over in Moses Lake, was released after, I think, 9 years of time, even though he slaughtered these people. So we're going, in my humble opinion, absolutely the wrong direction. If we really want to stop gun violence, then let's, look, people who are going to commit crimes with guns, they don't care about the law. They don't care. They're not like going, oh, I'm not going to do it because it's against the law. They're like, I don't care. So I think that we have to get tougher on those people who make those bad choices and just put a stop to this because it's ridiculous.
I agree, it is ridiculous. It's an infringement on all of our rights. The founding fathers of this nation put the Second Amendment in place, not so that we could have squirrel hunting guns to go out and kill squirrels, but it was also to stand against tyranny in our own government. And when people feel like they're oppressed and they have no way to act out against it, Hong Kong is a perfect example. Those people right now are begging for a Second Amendment so that they can defend themselves. They are fighting armed police officers with umbrellas that are trying to usurp their rights. And our founding fathers had fought a war against tyranny to free us. They were all considered criminals by the state that ruled them at that time. And as we look in history, they're the ones that made us free, that made us to be this great country that we are today. And the Washington State Constitution, in Article 1, Article 1, Section 124?
I think it's 24.
Yeah, it's 24.
Maybe 28.
Is even more strongly worded than the Second Amendment of the United States, where it says that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be impaired. That means don't even touch it. So House Bill 2241 is on the docket to be looked at by the legislator and voted on. And that bill right there is so that people would have to, register anything that's deemed an assault weapon, which is a semi-automatic rifle.
I believe so.
So that means that a .22 caliber Ruger that most kids learned how to shoot on when they were little kids is now classified as an assault weapon. And I honestly believe that what's happening here It's a much bigger thing than just trying to keep people safe, because we just had perfect evidence of what keeps people safe was the church in Texas, where this guy walked in and he pulled out a shotgun, so it wasn't even a semi-automatic weapon, and he shot 2 people. And the only thing that stopped him was the third person in the room that was armed that produced his weapon and shot the guy right in the head. Within 6 seconds, it was over.
Excuse me.
Bill?
Thank you very much for showing up today. Your Purple Hearts will be issued to you on the way out.
We're good.
My name's Bill Hewitt. I've been around the community for a long time. And democracy is a funny quotient. It's made up of people. You know, it's by the people, for the people, and of the people. And Senator Mike Padden is running a bill. Mike's a Republican, so remember you have one-party rule in the state, so it probably won't survive. Senator Mike Padden is running a bill that will dramatically change how your Supreme Court justices are elected. Right now, 7 out of your 9 are from Puget Sound. And they're basically elected by the money that comes out of the trial lawyers and the big lobby firms that are in the Seattle metropolitan area. His bill will basically say that the Supreme Court justices will be elected by districts. So please support that. And my comment is we have 10 federal legislative districts, which in the census that's coming up will be reproportioned and there'll be some changes. But it would probably be wise to have the justices elected from those districts. You would have 10, not an odd number, but it could function much like the 9th does in San Francisco, where I believe they have 21 justices. 7 have to set to hear a case. 3 have to set to see if they're going to hear the case. And so it has some flexibility and would much better serve the democratic process in the state of Washington. Second, if I may, you know where my passion is on Interstate 5. And we should, and everybody in this room should be looking for solutions. I think that's what they want you to do, is bring a solution to the table. I have sat through a couple of the interstate meetings now, and when the states of Washington and Oregon make their presentations to you, nowhere do they say, here are our goals. We want to decrease the commute time by 50%. We want to increase freight mobility by X. We want to provide for future traffic growth and economic growth. What they're saying is, and you all seem to be listening, is that we spent all this money and we're going to have to pay back the federal government, so we need to build a new bridge because the one bridge we have is not seismically complete. But yet the state of Oregon has said you can spend 25 to 30% of the money and make the bridge seismically active and have it. So we want solutions, I think. I-5 needs fixed. Do we need a new east side interconnect? Absolutely. Do we need a west side interconnect? Probably absolutely, if we're going to continue to grow. As I've shared with you, all of you, is that our community, Clark County, graduates over 10,000 seniors a year out of their high schools. So just do the simple math. Divide that in half. Half of them go to college, they leave. Divide that half in half. You're down to 2,500 because they bunk up or they decide to go to Clark. And divide that half in half. So for safety. So this community has to provide about 1,200 new housing units a year just to serve our internal domestic growth. That's no input from California. That's no input from new jobs. That's just us. And so when you deal with the Growth Management Act, so that you all know, there's a subdivision being completed in Ridgefield that will be a subdivision, not a townhome complex, a subdivision that'll have 24-foot wide lots by 80-foot deep. And they're doing that under the guise of affordable housing. And I'm sitting here saying, where in the Growth Management Act did they ever consider the quality of life? Simple things such as having your kids have the responsibility of raising a dog, for crying out loud, or being able to wash your car in the parking lot. I mean, holy crap. And so the guy who was passionate that says, you know, we keep going on this, his passion was very, very well placed. Everybody here wants solutions. You know, the social media thing that's going on is starting to ramp up, and we might see it in, you know, juvenile suicides, where the blame game goes on and the bullying goes on, and they just can't manage it because of the deterioration of the families. So, again, none of you get the Bronze Star, but all of you get a Purple Heart. Thank you very much.
We only have a few minutes left, so you have been waiting so patiently, so I'm gonna call on you.
Well, I wasn't coming to talk, but I just want to say, we talked about suicide rates. I'm a mental health person. I also have a concealed weapons permit, so I'm not against guns, right? But I see the damage that happens. Suicide rates have spiked, and partly is because people have lost their connection to each other, and kids are alienated. And you just talked about one of my concerns, which is the way high-density housing is being built in this county. And you can't go down any street without seeing these ticky-tacky homes, and I hope no one from Jen is here. But you know, these narrow lots, no backyards, and there's no place for kids to go. How are they gonna be kids? I mean, when I was growing up, you went and played with your neighbors. You know, you had friends. You did stuff outside, and there's no place to even have a garden. There's no place to have a dog or do any of that. So kids end up stuck in these little houses on the computer. And they see all sorts of terrible things that they shouldn't even be exposed to at that age. And they think the world revolves around what they see. And if they're depressed and they're anxious, they watch these violent video games. And you wonder why these kids who haven't gotten the help they needed in school, the school systems, or from their parents, end up walking into some place with a gun. Right. Now, my problem with guns and in general is that it's easy. It is so fast. You don't have time to think. And these young people, their judgment's not very good. They don't have a lot of impulse control. I mean, you remember being a teenager, and then you give this kind of, you know, and you think about all the crazy things you did that you don't even want to talk about, you know. And they're going to have a lethal weapon in their hands because they're 18 or 21 or whatever you want to be. You know, they don't have the ability to process the anger or the emotions that they need to be able to handle. So they have to learn how to handle negative things because everybody has to deal with them. And they don't have coping skills. They're not getting taught coping skills. How do you deal with stuff when you get angry? How do you deal with stuff when you're disappointed? Or your girlfriend breaks up with you? You know, all the things that kids go through. But they didn't have that much access to guns. That wasn't, you know, they used to get in fights with each other in the schoolyard, and they fought with their fists. They didn't bring a gun, you know. So I think I'm not against guns, and I appreciate your concerns about guns. But I think we need to take a look at how people have access to so many guns in our culture, and how our culture has become so violent.
Thank you for sharing those thoughts. We are now a little bit over time, and so we have to get to our next town hall. And I can't let a town hall go by without revealing that the last time I planned them too close and Larry got a speeding ticket. So,
I was gonna ask, how did it go coming today, Jim?
I made it okay. I don't need the new mayor to fix my ticket.
Since you opened the door.
You have to.
The other mayor didn't fix his ticket.
Larry has broad shoulders, he can handle all this. I want to echo the sentiments of the individual who said that they appreciated the civil discourse. It seems like that is a lot of what's missing at all levels of politics in the United States right now. And so I wanted to thank you all for coming out, spending this beautiful day with us, and encourage you to keep in touch with us. We all have our cards out there, and I want to do a quick plug. If you have children or grandchildren who might have an interest in being a page for the Senate, or actually the House, although the Senate's better, then
Get their maroon jackets in the Senate.
yeah, they're really pretty. But please reach out to our offices. The process is super easy, and it can all be done online. And we love to bring younger kids up to be able to participate in that program. So that's my plug for that.
By the way, and thank you for your passion. I mean, without passion, nothing would move. And whether or not we all agree